The Federal and City Union Bank jointly present the Tanjavur Marathon 2025 on Sunday, February 23. This event is powered by Sri Kamachi Medical Center and Anandam Silks and organized by Tanjavur District Athletics Association.
It's 77 years after the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. In all these 77 years, we have remembered him twice a year, almost in ritual fashion. But today, there are deep questions, deep thinking, whether it's possible to actually retrieve Gandhi for our times. And probably the main reason behind it is that we are confronted with a situation which Gandhi himself confronted towards the last days of his life. A time of intolerance, a time of communal disharmony, a time when people were fighting one another. And Gandhi's death was in a way a sacrifice to the ideal of a harmonious, peaceful nation of nonviolence. And today, when we ask this question, whether Gandhi can save us or we can save ourselves through Gandhi, through the retrieval of his memory and his thoughts, we are joined by Professor Sudhir Chandra, one of the foremost thinkers about Gandhi, a historian but an intellectual among historians, whose works have consistently addressed the thoughts and life of Gandhi. His book, Gandhi, An Impossible Possibility, is probably a delving into the very person of Gandhi, his inner thoughts, his inner conflicts, especially during his last days, when he died a tragic figure, when he died with most of his dreams shattered. Welcome, Professor Sudhir Chandra.
Thank you.
Let me start with a little remark that you made a few years back about the Indian nation having taken its birth with an act of patricide. In that sense, India is probably very unique in the sense that at its moment of birth, it was guilty of killing its own father, the Mahatma. What does it bode as a nation for such an act to become part of our history? And how do you see it now, that particular situation where we may be able to identify a person who did it, but at the same time, there is a nation which is fully guilty of that particular crime? How would you see that now?
Well, honestly, it doesn't bode well for a people that the history of their independence should begin with an act of patricide. Idea of patricide, or this looking upon Gandhi's killing as an act of patricide, itself is something which is not usually shared by Indians, which in a sense is extraordinary, that they should not look upon Gandhi's assassination as an act of patricide and instead hold a certain individual or a certain ideology responsible for the father's death. That in itself is significant. And like I said, it doesn't bode well. Now, why it doesn't bode well? Not because an individual was killed, but because the ideals that he stood for, the path that he showed us, which we believed we were following, all that has been forsaken. And it is that which makes this act of patricide. Now, what is the word for it? Tragic. And I would say that this is a tragedy not only for India but for humankind at large. Because even while Gandhi was fighting for India's independence and harboring a certain dream of independent India, he did not have only India in mind. He was always thinking in terms of a new world structure, which is evident in his Hind Swaraj, a text which he wrote in 1909. And from then on, even when Gandhi talked of India's problems, when he talked of a dream for a new India, he always maintained that India will show a path to the entire world, and this restructuring of India will actually be a signal for the rest of the world to follow. And I'll remind you of an expression which he often used, and that was Dukhi Jagat. Now, this Dukhi Jagat is his concern, not only India. So, the killing of Gandhi, and I need not reiterate, when I say killing of Gandhi, it's not just the killing of an individual. So, the killing of Gandhi is actually a tragedy for the entire mankind.
Gandhi and, say, even Ambedkar were working at a time when we only had very limited, shall we say, exposure and experience of a parliamentary democracy. We had legislative councils for the provinces, the presidencies and the principalities, and even that was in a very limited fashion. And they had what one would call a fixed common enemy or an adversary in the form of the British Empire. But today, what we find post-independence after 75 years is that we have a much more plural system. We have a parliamentary democracy and electoral democracy. We have several parties representing several interests, several geographical areas, several communities. How would their conception of democracy as it stood then, which was almost at its nascent stage, and the present condition where there are much greater interests at work and no single adversary, if I may put it that way, how will their notions of democracy match with ours, or how can theirs be a kind of, shall I say, corrective for our democracy today?
See, you are absolutely right. And that is why, more than Gandhi, Ambedkar is being remembered today. So this point which Ambedkar made, and a very important point, Gandhi is not invoked when we talk of social democracy. Ambedkar is, and rightly so. I have no problem with that. Right then he had shown that political democracy would mean nothing without social democracy. There was a phase when it seemed that that a vibrant social democracy was evolving. Post-Mandal especially. I mean, the kind of fervent, the kind of fervor, the kind of spirit we saw. And incidentally, I must confess that when this happened, I had serious reservations. But I can see what a remarkable thing happened in Indian democracy at that time. But once this Mandal Kamandal politics started playing out, the whole process got skewed. And at the moment, it seems that whatever be the force of these conflicting interests, a different kind of consensus is also emerging. The 2024 election has shown that it can't work for very long. But still, the way they have mastered, or the way they have controlled the state apparatus, this conflict of interests for certain period of time can be contained. And we can see that while parliamentary democracy is flourishing, there is virtually no parliament. It is pointless to talk of parliamentary democracy.
One major question that is foremost in the minds of most people given to the idea of democracy is the future of the Indian Constitution. No doubt it was and it still is a statement of aspiration that the nation would be one in which every human being can find a place, an equal place. But in the way in which the nation has evolved, we have seen that even though a lot has been achieved, there were always been, in one way or another, hurdles for the achievement of the actual constitutional objectives. And in many instances, that constitutional morality or the ethics of the Constitution, as Shakespeare would say, has been more flouted than adhered to. And today, even though it appears as a kind of anomaly, there is talk about a Hindu constitution coming up, which is written by or formulated by some people in the Sanatana Sansthan and the Sanskrit University, which is based upon the laws of Manu, and where the minorities or the non-Hindus are basically disenfranchised. How would you look at the Constitution and the struggle to actually maintain the Constitution? Because I'm not thinking of the Constitution as some kind of absolute end in itself. It is an aspirational one, and we may probably be able to go beyond that into a much better thing. But even that seems to be unachievable right now, and there are different attempts to subvert the Constitution. What is your response to that?
Well, these attempts have been gaining force. And actually, it's only you who told me about this idea of a Hindu constitution. And you perhaps told me that a draft is already ready. For me, that is not so much of a threat as the erosion of the constitution from within. Like Ambedkar had said right in the beginning, that it will depend upon the individuals who work it.
With good people, a bad constitution will work, but with bad people, a good constitution will not work.
And so what the question you are raising, I think, has to be seen from another point of view also, that is about the worth or the efficacy of a system, whatever system. your system of selection in universities or the working of the Indian Constitution, whatever, or your legal system, if those working the system are not invested in that system, they will torpedo it, they will violate it.
But Sudhir, what about the people who are victims of that?
That is, well, victims are in a majority, but majority is not united. Only if numbers mattered, this world would be a very nice place. It could be a difficult place also for those in a minority. But where do numbers matter except for purposes of electing? And even that is now being
Subverted.
so. The Hindu constitution, I don't, and I don't think they'll be foolish enough to resort to something so needless, explicit but needless. This serves no purpose, this Hindu constitution. I would suggest that we have to think of other ways. And the unfortunate case of Father Sten Swami, I think should be a pointer. Where is the scope for non-violence resistance in a country where the state will throw a person in jail, the highest judiciary would turn a blind eye to that. So Sten Swami for me, and Sten Swami would not have been, this could not have happened if we as people were different from what we are.
But I would at the same time suggest that earlier assassination of Gandhi's body, and when you refer to Stan Swami, it's effectively the same ideology and the same people who have killed his ideas again when it comes to Stan Swami. It's like something that was budding, reaching its fruition by the time we have Stan Swami and the others.
Right, but the aftermath of that, people should have been out on the streets. They were not all ideologically. The Supreme Court should suo motu have taken up the case of the others. It didn't. So I'm talking of that communalization of the Hindu psyche. So we have to think of other, that's why, like I said, very small scale efforts, local efforts. And these local efforts in course of time might gather momentum and become larger. But for the moment,
You're not very hopeful.
which I wish to be. Because as one who cares for Gandhi, who knows that Gandhi said something which alone can save humankind, it is incumbent on me not to lose hope. And the very fact that even in this state of despair, I continue to speak, even though it is only of my despair, I continue to write from time to time. That in itself
is an articulation of hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Narayanan.
I'll just conclude this long conversation with a little quote from Professor Sudhir Chandra himself. We who once made Gandhi possible because we believed in him have made him impossible by not believing in him. And this at a time when we and the world need him more than ever before. Let's hope that we can make Gandhi a possibility. Let's hope against hope.
The Federal and City Union Bank jointly present the Thanjavur Marathon 2025 on Sunday, February 23. This event is powered by Sri Kamachi Medical Center and Anandam Silks and organized by Thanjavur District Athletics Association.